After 16 years of building this division from the ground up, my boss replaced me with a kid half my age for the sake of youthful energy. They thought I'd quietly fade into the background. Instead, I prepared to take the one thing they couldn't afford to lose. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious, where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The summons to Greg's office felt painfully routine, a standard check-in on a Tuesday morning that held no warning signs of the catastrophe waiting behind the frosted glass door. I had been with this company for 16 years. I had weathered recessions, budget cuts, and complete market shifts. I walked in with my notebook in hand, ready to discuss Q3 projections, believing that my tenure and my numbers were an unshakable foundation. I was wrong. When I sat down, Greg didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask about the family. He didn't even look me in the eye immediately. He just shuffled a stack of papers on his mahogany desk, the sound loud in the sudden silence. Then, without any preamble, he dropped the bomb that incinerated my career. Thomas, we're making some structural changes, he said, his voice rehearsed. We're letting you go from the division director role. The air left the room. My division director role, the role I had built. I blinked, waiting for the punchline, but Greg kept talking. He explained that I wasn't being replaced by a veteran from a competitor or someone with deeper industry ties. No, I was being ousted for a kid named Ben Cummings. Ben was barely out of college. He wasn't even 30 years old. I had ties older than him. Ben has the right energy for where we're going, Greg said, finally looking up, though his eyes were vacant. We need a new direction, innovative thinking. We need youthful energy to lead the way. Youthful energy, the phrase hit me like a physical slap across the face. It wasn't about performance, my numbers were stellar. It wasn't about competence, it was about age. My career wasn't just a job to me, it was my life's work, a structure I had bricked together day by day for nearly 2 decades. And now Greg was handing the keys to a child who probably thought networking was just a buzzword for adding strangers on LinkedIn. I don't understand, I managed to say, my stomach twisting into a hard, cold knot. You'll be transitioning into a senior advisor role, Greg added quickly, offering the title like a consolation prize. It's a vital position. It wasn't vital, it was a pasture. It was a waiting room for retirement. As I walked out of his office, my feet felt like lead dragging against the carpet. The betrayal was worse than the demotion itself. It was the realization that loyalty meant absolutely nothing. The transition happened with brutal speed. Within 48 hours, my belongings were moved from the spacious corner office overlooking the city skyline to a cramped, windowless box near the break room. It was the kind of office designed to make you quit, isolated, stuffy, and irrelevant. I sat in my new senior advisor chair, which squeaked every time I leaned back and stared at the blank wall. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a potent cocktail of humiliation and rage. I could hear the buzz of the office outside, the office I used to run. I could hear Ben's voice carrying down the hallway, loud and performative, greeting people whose names he likely didn't know. He was walking the floor, laughing a little too loudly, using corporate jargon like a shield. I felt a sickness rise in my throat. I had spent years learning the personal details of my team, their kids' birthdays, their struggles, their strengths. Ben was treating them like NPCs in a video game he had just started playing. Hey Tom, Ben had poked his head in earlier, grinning like a shark. Excited to leverage your wisdom, buddy. Buddy. I had smiled then, a tight, painful grimace that didn't reach my eyes. Sure, Ben, whatever you need. I turned back to my computer screen where my access to the high-level executive files had already been revoked. They thought they had stripped me of my power. They thought that by taking away my title and my office, they had rendered me harmless. But as I sat there, the initial shock began to harden into a cold resolve. Greg and Ben were so focused on the youthful energy and the future that they had forgotten one crucial thing about this business. Companies don't run on energy, they run on relationships. And the relationships they were banking on didn't belong to the company. They belonged to me. To understand the depth of the insult, you have to understand what I gave up for this place. I missed my son's championship baseball game to close the Anderson deal. I spent my 10th wedding anniversary on a conference call in a hotel room in Tokyo to save the European account. I had poured my blood, sweat, and integrity into these accounts. So sitting in the back of the conference room a week later, arms crossed over my chest, watching Ben Cummings butcher a portfolio review was a special kind of torture. This was the first all-hands meeting under the new regime. Ben stood at the head of the table, my spot, wearing a suit that was too tight and too blue. He was projecting a slide deck that was all flash and no substance, filled with buzzwords like synergy, holistic approaches, and disruptive ideation. "Let's circle back on this team," Ben said, his voice pitching up in an attempt to sound authoritative. "We're looking for innovative solutions here, so let's get creative. No bad ideas, right?" I wanted to roll my eyes so hard it would hurt. The team looked confused. They were used to clear directives and strategic goals, not vague platitudes. Then he started going through the client list. He fumbled with the portfolio details, flipping through pages he clearly hadn't read thoroughly. "And looking at our growth sector," Ben said, pointing a laser pointer at the screen, "we have big opportunities with the, Giordano account." The room went dead silent. He had pronounced it Giordano, like the pizza chain. My stomach tightened. "Giordano," I whispered to myself, "Marco Giordano." Marco wasn't just a client, he was a titan in the industry. He was a man who demanded respect and precision. He was our biggest account, representing nearly 20% of the division's revenue. I had spent 5 years cultivating that relationship, learning Marco's preferences, his family's history, and his business philosophy. "Yeah, Giordano," Ben continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. "We're going to shake things up there, send them a new, modernized proposal, show them we're fresh." I shifted in my seat, my fingers tapping a frantic rhythm against my knee. Shake things up. Marco Giordano hated surprises. He hated fresh for the sake of fresh. He valued stability and legacy. Ben had no clue who Marco was or the kind of clout he held. He was treating the Giordano account like just another line item on a spreadsheet, unaware that he was juggling a hand grenade with the pin pulled out. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. I was dying to correct him, to stand up and stop this train wreck before it left the station. But I stayed seated. I was just the senior advisor, after all. If they wanted youthful energy, they were about to see exactly what inexperienced energy cost them. My phone buzzed against my thigh. The vibration was sharp, a distinct staccato rhythm that pulled my attention away from Ben's disastrous presentation. I glanced down at the screen, shielding it under the table. The name on the display made my pulse kick up a notch: Marco Giordano. I hadn't heard from him in months, not since the transition began. My stomach twisted. Marco never called just to chat. This wasn't a casual check-in, something was wrong. I tried to refocus on the meeting, but Ben was starting to unravel. He kept mixing up details, throwing numbers around like they were confetti, hoping something would stick. His words were empty calories, sweet, airy, and completely devoid of substance. I could feel the frustration radiating off the other team members. They were looking at their notebooks, at the floor, anywhere but at the train wreck happening at the head of the table. Ben fumbled through another section, mispronouncing the client's name again. "So, for the Giordano account." I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to help him, but professional pride is a hard habit to break. "Actually, Ben, it's Giordano with an O at the end," I said, my voice cutting through his stammering. He froze, glancing up at me like a deer in headlights. He blinked, clearly not hearing me at first. Right, got it," he said quickly, waving a hand dismissively as if I were a pesky intern rather than the man who had secured that account in the first place. "Tom's got the spell check covered, guys." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. I gritted my teeth, leaning back in my chair. I watched him try to regain his composure, acting like he had everything figured out, but I could see the wheels coming off the wagon. Ben wasn't ready for this level of play, and I wasn't about to watch him burn down the house I built. My phone buzzed again, harder this time. I glanced down. Message from Marco Giordano: "We need to talk. Urgent." The blood drained from my face, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the opening I hadn't realized I was waiting for. If Marco was bypassing Ben and coming to me, the chain of command was already broken. I stood up abruptly. The chair scraped loud against the floor. "Tom, we're in the middle of a brainstorm," Ben said, his voice tight. "I'll be back," I said, grabbing my things. Ked out of the room before he could protest, leaving him to drown in his own innovative thinking. I took the call in the hallway, pacing the length of the corridor. The conversation with Marco went smoothly, at least, as smoothly as a conversation with a furious client can go. "I'm not going to sit here and let this slide, Tom," Marco said, his voice low but vibrating with anger. "This new kid sent over a proposal that is frankly insulting. It cuts corners in places you never would have allowed. If the company doesn't fix this, I'm done. I'll take my business to M. Loud Group. I didn't need him to spell out the consequences. Losing Marco would be a financial crater for the division, but instead of panicking, I felt a strange sense of calm. I understand, Marco, I said, my voice steady, projecting the control Ben lacked. I'll get this straightened out. Give me 24 hours. Marco sighed, the sound of a man tired of amateur hour. All right, I'll give you another shot, but only if you are the one handling my account moving forward. I'm not dealing with Ben, got it? Understood, I said, you'll have what you need. I hung up, feeling the leverage click into place like a loaded magazine. Marco's trust was my lifeline. Later that afternoon, the facade finally cracked inside the office. Ben appeared in the doorway of my cramped advisor's closet. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His tie was loosened, and that youthful energy looked significantly drained. Hey, Tom, he said, his voice edged with desperation. I need your help with something. There's this proposal for a new client. I'm not sure I'm. He trailed off. I looked up from my desk, raising an eyebrow. You're not sure about what, Ben? I'm floundering here, he admitted, stepping into the room and closing the door. I need someone to help me put this structure together. The numbers aren't lining up. I leaned back, staring at him. This was the moment where I could have saved him. I could have mentored him, fixed the proposal, and made him look like a hero. But I remembered Greg's face when he demoted me. I remembered the pasture. Let's see what you've got, I said coldly. I glanced over the papers he handed me. It was a mess. He hadn't done his homework. I pointed out the glaring errors, regulatory issues he'd missed, margins that were too thin. Ben scribbled notes furiously, nodding like a student trying to cheat off a test he hadn't studied for. Thanks, Tom, really, he breathed, grabbing the papers back. I've got it from here. He didn't have it. He was just memorizing answers without understanding the questions. And I knew with absolute certainty that he was going to fail. The fallout was inevitable. Ben sent out the revised proposals without vetting them through legal, trying to meet impossible deadlines to impress Greg. 2 days later, the news broke internally. 2 mid-sized accounts had pulled out. They didn't like the new direction. The tension in the office became suffocating. Greg called me in not to apologize but to pressure me. If things don't improve soon, Greg said, sitting behind his desk with a tight expression, we might have to reevaluate the direction the company is going. Reevaluate? I asked, cutting him off. Greg, Ben isn't cut out for this. He's missing key competencies. He's not connecting with the team and he's driving clients away. Greg stared at me, his eyes flickering with frustration. He was in deep denial. To admit Ben was a failure was to admit he had made a mistake in firing me. I know things are difficult, Tom, but we're all in this together. Just keep doing what you can to support him. Support him? I wanted to scream. I was the only thing keeping the division from total collapse, and they were treating me like a backup generator. I went back to my desk and started keeping a list. Dates, times, specific errors. I documented the lost accounts, the complaints, the botched meetings. I was building a case file not for human resources but for my own exit strategy. Then came the breaking points. During an emergency, all hands meeting to discuss the recent client losses, Ben finally snapped under the pressure. He stood at the front of the room, sweating, trying to explain why the quarterly numbers were in the red. It's all going wrong, he muttered, his voice breaking. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, looking for a scapegoat. His gaze landed on me. Look, frankly, I don't know who to blame anymore, Ben said, his voice raising so everyone could hear. But it feels like we're just cleaning up someone else's mess. A lot of these issues, they go back to what was happening before I got here. The room went deadly silent. He was blaming me. He was standing there amidst the wreckage he had created and pointing the finger at my 16 years of success. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I looked at Greg, waiting for him to step in to defend the man who had built this division. Greg just looked down at his notepad. That was it. The loyalty was dead. The senior advisor was done advising. It was time to go to war. The summons to Greg's office came the morning after the meeting. I walked in, knowing exactly how this conversation would go. Greg wanted peace. He wanted me to swallow my pride, shake Ben's hand, and continue fixing the messes while the kid took the credit. Greg didn't even wait for me to sit. Look, Tom, we need to get this under control. Ben is feeling the pressure, and his outburst yesterday was just stress. We need unity. Unity? I asked, remaining standing. He blamed me for his own incompetence, Greg, and you sat there and let him. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. It's complicated. Ben represents the future of. No, I cut him off, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. What's complicated is that you're letting a child run a battleship and you have the captain sitting in the brig. You're getting snowed, Greg. Ben has his buzzwords and he's charmed the board, but I'm the one keeping the engine running. And frankly, I'm done. Greg looked up, genuine alarm finally breaking through his corporate mask. Tom, don't be rash. We can work out a. I'm not being rash, I said, placing a single white envelope on his desk. I'm being strategic. That is my resignation, effective immediately. You can't just walk away, Greg stammered, standing up. We have the Giordano account renewal next week. I smiled, and for the first time in months it was genuine. Good luck with that. Maybe Ben can use some of his youthful energy to close it. I turned and walked out. I didn't pack a box. I didn't say goodbye to the team. I simply walked out the front doors, got into my car, and drove away. The bridge wasn't just burned, I had detonated the foundations. The silence of the next morning was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I sat in my home study, my new headquarters, with a cup of coffee. I wasn't unemployed, I was liberated. The first call I made wasn't to a recruiter. It was to Marco Giordano. I've left the company, Marco, I said simply. I'm starting my own firm, Sterling Strategic. Marco didn't hesitate. Send me the contract, Tom. I told you I go where you go, and I'm not the only one. Loud Group is unhappy too. The next 3 months were a blur of grind and glory. It wasn't easy. I was working harder than I had in 20 years, building infrastructure from scratch. But every late night felt like a victory because it was mine. Slowly the dominoes fell. Marco Giordano officially signed with me, then Loud Group, then 2 more major accounts defected from my old firm, citing lack of confidence in leadership. My phone started ringing with calls from my old team members, the talented ones, the ones who actually did the work, asking if I was hiring. I was. I was rebuilding the dream team, leaving Ben with nothing but the empty suits. The final vindication came 6 months later. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Greg. Tom, he sounded 10 years older. We need to talk. We made a mistake, a big one. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in my leather chair, looking out at the view from my own office window. Ben didn't work out, Greg admitted, his voice quiet. The division is bleeding. We need someone with experience to stop the hemorrhaging. We want you back. Name your price. Title, salary, whatever you want. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. I thought about the pasture. I thought about being told I was too old. I'm not coming back, Greg, I said calmly. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it. Tom, please. Goodbyes, Greg. I hung up. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt peace. I had won. My phone buzzed one last time. I picked it up, expecting a plea from Greg, but it wasn't him. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the tone immediately. They let me go. They're blaming me for everything. Can we grab coffee? I could really use some advice. It was Ben. I looked at the message, let out a short, sharp laugh, and deleted it without replying. I had a company to run.